During World War II, German bombers launched their main attack on London, including the cities of Birmingham, Plymouth, Liverpool, and Finchley. This attack caused city residents to panic, including the Pevensie family with their 4 children: Lucy, Peter, Susan, and Edmund. Their mother then took the 4 children out of the house and managed to escape the ongoing attack. Their father, a colonel, was fighting against the German soldiers. The next day, their mother took the 4 children to Paddington Station to be evacuated along with other children. Before leaving, the mother told the eldest, Peter, to keep his siblings safe. They then boarded the train, waving goodbye to their mother. Each child from different families would be temporarily adopted by families who were able to take them in. And Peter and his siblings were adopted by a professor named Diggory Kirky. They finally arrived in a small town and were picked up by the professor's housekeeper, Mrs. Macready. The 4 children were very impressed when they saw the professor's large house. Upon entering, Mrs. Macready gave them the rule: they were not allowed to touch the antique items in the house. The next day, it started to rain. Lucy, who couldn't play outside, asked Peter to play hide-and-seek. Peter agreed and began counting from 1 to 100. Susan quickly hid behind a box, while Edmund took Lucy's hiding spot behind the curtains. Lucy conceded and went upstairs, where she found a room with only an old wardrobe. Lucy opened the wardrobe and hid inside, which was filled with warm coats. However, she found that the wardrobe was quite long and led her to a snowy forest. Lucy was puzzled as to why there was a beautiful forest inside the wardrobe. She then explored the forest and came upon a lamppost still brightly lit. At that moment, Lucy encountered a strange figure hiding behind a tree. The strange figure and Lucy both screamed until they finally mustered the courage to introduce themselves. It turned out that the figure was a faun named Mr. Tumnus. Mr. Tumnus was very surprised to learn that Lucy was a human. Lucy then asked if there were other humans there. Mr. Tumnus explained that this was the land of Narnia, which had been in perpetual winter for 100 years. Mr. Tumnus then invited Lucy to his home. Once there, Mr. Tumnus offered Lucy some tea, which she gladly accepted. As Mr. Tumnus played his musical instrument, Lucy saw a vision in the fire of fawns hunting a deer. Soon after, Lucy felt sleepy and dozed off. A few hours later, Lucy woke up to find Mr. Tumnus crying on the floor. Mr. Tumnus confessed that he felt guilty because he was supposed to report Lucy to the evil White Witch, who had turned the forest into eternal winter. Anyone who found a human was required to hand them over to her. However, since Mr. Tumnus still had a conscience, he quickly took Lucy back to their meeting place and urged her to leave before other creatures found her. When Lucy returned to the wardrobe, she found Peter just finishing his counting. Lucy told her siblings that she had been gone for hours in the world inside the wardrobe, but they didn't believe her since the hide-and-seek game had only just begun. This meant that time in Narnia was different from time in the human world. 1 hour in Narnia was equivalent to 1 second in the human world, give or take. The bottom line is, I don't know how to explain it clearly. Lucy kept telling her siblings that there was a snowy forest inside the wardrobe. Peter and Susan then checked the wardrobe but did not find the forest because they hadn't walked to the end of the row of coats. Peter, Susan, and Edmund then left, thinking that Lucy was just imagining things. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep because she was thinking about Tumnus. She decided to return to the old wardrobe secretly. Edmund, who was thirsty, accidentally saw Lucy. He followed her wherever she went until they entered the wardrobe and ended up in the snowy forest. Upon arrival, Edmund began to believe Lucy's story. He walked further and was suddenly startled by the arrival of a white witch-drawn sleigh. When the sleigh stopped, Edmund was immediately confronted by the sleigh driver named Ginarbrick, who was a dwarf. Then came the White Witch, whom Tumnus had previously mentioned, named Jadis. Jadis knew that Edmund was a descendant of Adam. She took him onto the sleigh and offered him Edmund's favorite food, Turkish delight, and chanted. Jadis confessed that she was the queen of Narnia without any children. Edmund mentioned that he was following his sister, Lucy, who was supposed to go to Mr. Tumnus's house. He also revealed that he had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Upon hearing this, Jadis immediately tempted Edmund to become her prince or adopted son, but on the condition that he must bring his siblings here to claim his honor. Jadis then bid farewell and showed the location of her kingdom between two snowy mountains, accompanying it with more Turkish delight for Edmund. After Jadis left, Lucy appeared, saying that she came from Tumnus's house. They both returned to the professor's house and told their siblings about their experiences in the world of Narnia. Unfortunately, Edmund behaved cowardly and refused to acknowledge that he had also entered the world through the wardrobe. This made Lucy upset and she cried. Lucy left the room, followed by Peter and Susan. They met Professor Diggory, who happened to be walking. Diggory instructed Mrs. Macready to take Lucy to the kitchen, while he would talk to Peter and Susan. In front of Diggory, Peter revealed that Lucy was hallucinating about Narnia inside the wardrobe. Diggory was surprised and began to inquire about Narnia from them. Peter turned the question back, asking if he believed Lucy's story. Diggory answered that he believed, and they should trust Lucy because they were family. The next day, Peter, Susan, and Edmund were seen playing badminton in the backyard, while Lucy was reading a book under a tree. During the game, Edmund accidentally hit the shuttlecock too hard, breaking a window. All four of them immediately ran to the back of the house and found that the professor's antique statue was broken. At that moment, Mrs. Macready shouted angrily as she approached them. Peter, Susan, and their two siblings quickly hid because they didn't want to be scolded by Mrs. Macready. Lucy intentionally led her siblings into the wardrobe, which led them to the snowy forest. Now, Peter and Susan also believed Lucy's story. They apologized for thinking Lucy was lying. They took coats and went to Lucy's friend Mr. Tumnus's house. There, they found Tumnus's house in disarray. Peter found a piece of paper containing a warning message, stating that Tumnus had betrayed the queen by hiding his enemies, the human children. At that moment, a robin seemed to urge them to leave Tumnus's house. As they stepped out, they encountered a talking beaver. The beaver called Lucy's name and handed her Tumnus's handkerchief, revealing that Tumnus had been taken by Jadis's forces for befriending human children. The beaver then invited them to his home to discuss more about Narnia. There, they were greeted by Mrs. Beaver, who happily served them fresh fish. Mr. Beaver began to tell them about the arrival of Aslan, the true king of Narnia. Narnia had been taken over by Jadis and her allies. They drove out the inhabitants of Narnia and cursed anyone who opposed them. Mr. Beaver also told them about the prophecy stating that two sons of Adam and two daughters of Eve would help Aslan defeat Jadis and restore Narnia. Mr. Beaver believed that Peter and his siblings were the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve mentioned. He asked Peter to seek out Aslan, but Peter refused, feeling inadequate for such a task. As Peter, Susan, and Lucy were about to leave, they found out that Edmund was missing. It turned out Edmund was still lured by Jadis's promises. He had walked alone to Jadis's castle without fear of the dangers awaiting him. Peter, Susan, Mr. Beaver, and the others hurried to find Edmund and discovered that he had gone to Jadis's castle. Mr. Beaver warned Peter not to enter the castle because Jadis might kill them to break the prophecy. He suggested finding Aslan because he held the key. Edmund had now reached the castle courtyard and found numerous Narnian creatures turned into statues by Jadis's curse. Edmund met a wolf named Mogrim, Jadis's right-hand man. Mogrim then took Edmund to Jadis, who was now unfriendly. Jadis was furious to learn that Edmund hadn't brought his siblings as she instructed. She ordered Mogrim to put Edmund in prison and sent him to kill Edmund's siblings. Peter, Susan, and their two siblings were in a panic when a pack of wolves began to approach their house. Mr. Beaver and his wife then led the children through the tunnel and ended up among a group of Narnian animals who had been enchanted into statues by Jadis. They met Mr. Fox, who informed them that he had met Aslan. At that moment, Mogrim and his pack arrived. Peter, Susan, and the two siblings quickly climbed up a tree to hide, while Mr. Fox confronted Mogrim. Mogrim asked where the human children were. Mr. Fox, who had previously sided with Jadis, chose to defy Mogrim by lying that the human children had gone north. After Mogrim and his pack left, Mr. Fox, Mr. Beaver, and the children made a campfire to warm themselves. Here, Mr. Fox told them that Aslan had ordered him to recruit more troops. Peter suddenly revealed that he was not ready to be involved in any war. However, Mr. Beaver kept insisting, saying that Aslan needed their help. Elsewhere, Edmund was seen in a cell with his hands chained. Right next to him, he saw Tumnus, who was in the same predicament. Tumnus then asked Edmund to give him the food provided by Jadis. At that moment, Jadis arrived and immediately asked Edmund about the whereabouts of his 3 siblings. Edmund mentioned that they were on a journey to find Aslan. Jadis then ordered her minions to take Tumnus to the palace prison while Edmund would accompany her to find his siblings. As Edmund was about to board the sled, he saw that Tumnus had turned into a statue. He felt guilty because he had previously told Jadis about Tumnus's friendship with Lucy. Meanwhile, the beaver, Peter, Susan, and Lucy were continuing their journey to find Aslan. As they crossed an ice field, they saw a sleigh heading towards them. Mr. Beaver thought it was Jadis's sleigh, so he quickly took the children to hide under some rocks. Soon, they discovered that the sleigh did not belong to Jadis but to Santa Claus. Santa Claus blessed Peter and his siblings with gifts. Lucy received a bottle of fruit juice that could cure any illness with just 1 drop and also a small dagger for protection. Susan was given a bow and arrows, while Peter was given a shield and a silver sword. The beaver, Peter, and his 2 siblings continued their journey by crossing the river. However, soon after, Malgrim and his pack of wolves arrived. They surrounded the children and attacked Mr. Beaver. Peter tried to point his sword at Malgrim but was still afraid. At this moment, chunks of ice in the waterfall suddenly collapsed, causing the water to rush towards them. Peter embraced his 2 siblings and held onto the sword he had planted in a block of ice. Upon reaching the other side of the river, Peter and his siblings were overjoyed when the snow around them began to melt magically. Elsewhere, Edmund and Janarbrick arrived at the waterfall, followed by Malgrim bringing Mr. Fox, who had betrayed Jadis. Mr. Fox tried to plead with Jadis not to kill him, but Jadis ignored him and instead turned Mr. Fox into a statue. Jadis then ordered Malgrim to gather his forces for battle. Mr. Beaver, Peter, Susan, and Lucy finally arrived at Aslan's camp. They met Aslan's forces, which consisted of centaurs, fawns, and other animals. Peter approached the war general named Aureus and expressed his desire to meet Aslan. Aslan then emerged from the tent, revealed to be a large male lion. Aslan welcomed them, and Peter explained that they needed Aslan's help to save Edmund, who was currently captured by the White Witch. In the evening, Susan and Lucy were seen playing by the river. They were delighted to be wearing royal gowns. At the same time, Malgrim and another Wolf suddenly appeared. Susan and Lucy screamed as loud as they could, which was heard by Peter. Peter immediately ran to Susan and pointed his sword at the 2 wolves. At this moment, Aslan appeared and attacked Malgrim. He instructed his general not to help Peter fight Malgrim. Malgrim ultimately impaled himself on Peter's sword. This made Aslan proud because Peter had made his enemy surrender without orders. Afterward, Aslan freed Mr. Fox and instructed his general to follow Malgrim because he knew where Edmund was. Aslan then knighted Peter as a knight of virtue of Narnia. Aslan's forces finally found Edmund and freed him. They then returned to the camp. The next day, Edmund arrived at the camp and was welcomed by his 3 siblings. Edmund apologized, saying that all of this was his fault. In the afternoon, they began training for battle so that they wouldn't be a burden during the war. At that moment, Jadis suddenly arrived with her forces. She approached Aslan and demanded that Edmund be handed over to her because every traitor belonged to Jadis. Aslan then took Jadis into the tent to discuss the matter. A few minutes later, they emerged. Aslan revealed that Jadis had relinquished her claim, meaning Edmund was free from Jadis's grasp. However, no one knew that Aslan had offered himself in Edmund's place. That night, Lucy saw Aslan walking into the forest alone. She woke Susan to follow Aslan. Upon arriving in the middle of the forest, Aslan asked Lucy and Susan to accompany him to the stone table. However, when they were almost there, Aslan instructed them to hide because if they followed, Jadis would kill them. Aslan walked to meet Jadis, who was performing a barbaric ceremony. Jadis ordered her troops to tie up Aslan and cut his hair. After that, she placed Aslan on the stone table and executed him with a dagger. Jadis then ordered her general, the Minotaur, to prepare all the troops because tomorrow they would wage war on Narnia. After everyone left, Lucy and Susan approached Aslan's body and mourned his death. At the same time, a swarm of mice suddenly appeared to gnaw at the ropes binding Aslan. Susan and Lucy then sent news of Aslan's death to Peter through the trees, which was received by a flower spirit. The flower spirit announced that Aslan had died and now Peter would lead the battle. The next morning, the first battle began. Peter deployed his troops at the base of a cliff and positioned Edmund to lead the archers. Jadis's army, consisting of numerous strange creatures, began to approach. Peter initiated the war by sending the griffin troops to drop large stones on Jadis's forces. After that, Peter led the troops in combat against the enemy defenses. At the stone table, Lucy and Susan decided to return to the camp. However, before they could go far, Aslan's body suddenly disappeared magically. Then a light appeared from the east, followed by Aslan's return. Aslan explained to Lucy and Susan that when a willing victim who has committed no treachery is executed on the stone table, they would come back to life. Aslan then took Lucy and Susan to Jadis's castle, where he would restore all the statues back to life. Upon arriving there, Aslan began blowing on all the statues, including Tumnus, bringing them back to their original forms. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Peter ordered Edmund to direct the phoenix weapon. The bird ignited itself and created a fire barrier. However, Jadis easily passed through the barrier, forcing Peter to command his troops to retreat. Peter lured Jadis's army to the middle of the cliff, followed by an archer attack from Narnia's troops. During the battle, Peter managed to take down many enemies, while Aureus was turned into a statue when he tried to fight Jadis. Edmund, seeing Jadis about to attack Peter, immediately intervened. He attacked Jadis and successfully broke her magic wand. However, Edmund fell after Jadis stabbed him in the stomach with her spear. Seeing his brother defeated, Peter became enraged and ran towards Jadis to fight her. Unfortunately, Peter lost because he had not eaten breakfast. Just as Jadis was about to kill Peter, Aslan arrived with additional forces. Aslan quickly ran towards Jadis and killed her by biting her neck. Meanwhile, Lucy took the dragon fruit juice and dropped a few drops onto Edmund's still wounded injury, which miraculously healed the stab wound in his stomach. The next day, Aslan inaugurated the four siblings as rulers of Narnia at Cair Paravel Castle. Lucy was crowned Queen of the Eastern Sea, Edmund became King of the Western Wood, Susan became Queen of the Southern Region, and Peter became King of the Northern Sky. After the coronation ceremony, Lucy saw Aslan walking away from the castle. Tumnus told Lucy that Aslan would return again, but after that, he would not come back. Days passed, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. The four siblings had grown up and began to forget who they really were. One day, they were playing on horseback in the middle of the forest and accidentally found the lamppost marking the entrance to Narnia through the old wardrobe. Lucy then invited her three siblings to the wardrobe, and they arrived at Professor Diggory's house just as he was about to join an antique statue. They were greeted by Professor Diggory. At the end of the story, Lucy tried to re-enter the old wardrobe at night. Professor Diggory then told Lucy that she could no longer enter Narnia the same way, but she would enter it when she least expected to. The film then ended. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on other exciting content. See you in the next video.